Hey, let me take 1 second here to let you guys know that my products, the Titan Crew, are available over at Walmart. You got the pump product, get that focus on the workout, the test booster, bump it naturally, and then the joint support. You gotta keep the joints healthy, that way you can train for a lifetime. I want to take that 1 minute. Let's get back into the podcast. Thanks again.
That's why I hate when people point and say, well, Ronnie Coleman did this, or, they'll select a particular athlete. And then my answer is always, well, you're not Ronnie Coleman to begin with.
Hey guys, this is the Mike O'Hearn Show. And on today's episode, I am bringing back Stan Efferding. And the reason why is because I can see that social media is going in a direction of everything is supported by the science. And that's when it's coming to health and fitness. And we're going to keep this focused on the elites or wanting to be an elite. And so I'm going to have Stan jump back in here, kind of cover cardiovascular, weight training, right rep range, rest periods, recovery when it comes to food or anything like that, massage, chiropractic, any kind of recovery that you guys believe in or are the studies are supporting. This show, again, I'm bringing you this because I would like to share opinion of mine and what I've seen some of the greatest do outside of knowing the information that you guys are going to learn today. So it is great to learn. It is great to study. This is always first and foremost as you're doing your craft, whatever that craft is. I think you should always learn. And there's a quote that says, elites continue to learn. Only beginners know everything. And I like that quote because I'm seeing that in social media that it is the beginners. And again, you could live for probably 10 years and I still consider you a beginner. There's so much things that you're not seeing when all you look at is the study. There's other effects that really set you up to win outside of the study. And so that's why today's is so important to me is because I see social media is going to one direction. And I want you guys that are out there, you lone wolves, you guys that are believing in something bigger. And that's what it was. Health and fitness was something bigger to me than just working out. And I want you guys to hear this discussion today. And again, today's going to be a lot of knowledge. Bring your pen and paper, write this stuff down, circle it, get out there and get to the gym. But wait until the end of this show. I do want to make this clear that I am going to get Stan to talk about this stuff or recap in a much more slimmed way. But this is also me asking him to do this for the 5%ers, the 1%ers, the elites. So for you guys that are out there, I hope you're all trying to get to that level. And the reason why I want him to go into this portion of it about them is because he could talk about the 70-year-old woman that's for the first time lifting, and he can talk about the 12-year-old kid that's going to want to start training. So there's a huge window, but I need to narrow it down. So for the viewers today, understand that this will be that pinnacle athlete, and then you can taper it down to where you are at that level. But I want you guys to understand that pinnacle of what he's going to be talking about and to the athletes he's worked with and the athletes he's been around and the athletes that he's competed against. Okay. So the first one I sent over the study on, and I just saw some of your stuff talking about this. That's why I wanted to start with this, sleep and not getting enough, going to the gym, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, obviously it's critical. I think I've beat this horse enough, but it is the foundation upon which everything else sits. And, I most famously on Mark Bell's podcast said, if you're religiously taking your 5-gram scooper of thimble-sized scooper of creatine every day and only sleeping 5 hours a night, you're a fucking idiot. And I believe that in terms of weight loss, in terms of performance. I mean, we know what the research suggests that sufficient sleep obviously is going to help with recovery. It's going to help with your hormones, your testosterone, cortisol, your hunger hormones, ghrelin, your insulin sensitivity. And it's important. The duration is important because, sleep is broken up into a number of these little blocks, 90-minute thereabout blocks, and when you sleep, each subsequent block has a longer and longer REM and stage 4 restorative sleep. So that's why I push for that 7+ hours. I want you to get into that extended phase of restorative stage 4 sleep so that you can get the vast majority of the recovery that you're intending to get from sleep. But it's critical. I mean, and also injury prevention and reduction. There's a linear equation between sleep loss and injury. So all of that is obviously critical. And that's kind of where I start. I ask my clients to send me their hours of sleep every day.
Okay. Now that being said, this again is the studies support this. Is that correct?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no question. And they've looked at a lot of different things. You might be able to go in and a power lifter might be able to go in and not have a significant detriment in performance from 1 or 2 nights of short sleep. But the endurance activities are affected significantly more. And those, you just end up losing your capacity to perform at a high aerobic state for an extended period of time. And so, and again, as for the general population, the hunger becomes a key component, and those hunger signaling from the ghrelin hormone, and just being awake more hours in a day gives you a greater opportunity to be hungry again and eat another meal, and of course go over your daily calorie allotment.
See, I find that I'm much more settled if I sleep more, and so Mona's not beating me up and stuff. So that works out as well for me, and that's science based.
That's why I think it was smart when I told you to put her in the other room that you did that. That was great.
We're on the same page. With that being said, can I say this is your adopted opinion of sleep? Not really. Let me finish. Because the science supports it now, and this is something maybe you didn't know 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
It's interesting you ask that question. I've always said if I knew then what I know now, I would have been much better and much younger when I accomplished these goals I had been pursuing. But bodybuilding and powerlifting in particular, and I think sports in general certainly would lend themselves to this, but it's kind of an immediate feedback kind of sport. And you and I both know that you're measuring your performance on a daily basis, bodybuilding or powerlifting. You know how much weight you can lift for how many sets and reps, and about your level of fatigue throughout a particular workout. And if you miss a night or two of sleep and miss a meal or aren't sufficiently hydrated, and you go to the gym and all of a sudden your PR is 20, 30 pounds below what you had historically been able to achieve, you can already surmise what the cause of that is and quickly correct it. And then when you come back to the gym a day or two later, you see that you're stronger. I often said, well, more recently, I've been saying that there's a great philosopher who once said, weakness is never a strength. And then I follow that up by saying, well, it was actually Mark Bell, but even a broken clock.
I thought that
was
was Huck Finn, but Mark Twain. Sorry, not even Huck
yeah,
Finn.
It
My
was
bad.
Mark Bell, and then I say even a broken clock is right twice a day. But I've lived, pretty much. I've lived my entire life, my entire career that way from the time I first started lifting. If you're weaker, that's a problem, and that's a problem for any sport. It's a problem for any even general population. We're trying to stave off the rate of decline for longevity, health span, and lifespan. So I've used that as a metric. And
so you're not only haven't really adopted it because you figured it out that there was something on these days off, and you kind of went back to it. And so now that the science is supported, I want the fans to understand. Yes, he understands the science today, but this is something he was intelligent enough with common sense to understand. There was days that the sleep was playing a game, and I need to get more sleep and be cognizant to that back 30 years ago.
Yeah, and I think it is common sense, but even more so, as I mentioned, there's immediate feedback. You go into the gym and you're weaker, that's certainly not going to bode well for performance. It was when I was in business, I think what a lot of people miss. And again, we're intending to talk about the top 1% of athletes, and certainly it's a huge contributor for that.
You can do that with business.
I think in everyday life, and I learned this myself when I started my company and started burning the candle at both ends. Even cognitively, you have a significant decline in your energy and your ability to focus and your level of fatigue and exposure to anxiety and stress. All of that is amplified by less sleep. And you might not be as keen to it or as quick to remedy the situation under those circumstances. Whereas in the bodybuilding and powerlifting world, I mean, we immediately try and intervene if something makes us weaker. So we had, we self-corrected right away.
We're going to jump you onto the next stage, which would be the loved cardio question. How much cardio is sufficient for that or proper, or the research shows both fat burning or cardiovascular in the sense of heart strength, anything like that you have to take with science-based that's coming into play here. What is the recommendations of today? What's the recommendations from the health and fitness, I guess, techs, big wigs, and then your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, we covered that I think pretty thoroughly last time. We discussed that the VO2 max, increasing your VO2 max is obviously always going to lead to better lifespan and health span. It also helps with recovery, which is why I always felt that bodybuilding and powerlifting, when I did them together, I benefited from the fact that the bodybuilding was a lot more volume and frequency, shorter rest times and just more sets. And that obviously improved my cardiovascular fitness, which helped me to recover better. I mentioned that, I think it was Dmitry Klokov used to do a lot of cardio in the off season in terms of periodizing his training, so that when he started transitioning into his heavier Olympic lifts, he had built up a foundation, what we call it GPP, general physical preparedness, so that he could more quickly transition, recover better from the heavy workouts, and progress faster into the heavier weights. So always, and then Louis Simmons, of course, most famously, I don't think what people understand behind the scenes at Westside, just how much Louis moved and how much he asked his or required his athletes to be able to move. And they did that with a lot of low fatigue movements. A lot of the stuff that I use with UFC fighters and the like is to use a lot of sleds and just a lot of general movement that gets your heart rate up for an extended period of time. And it helps you recover from training. And that's, and of course, depending on the sport, you're going to want a greater and greater VO2 max. If you're into more distance types of things like biking or running and things like that, you want to specifically train it. But it bodes well for bodybuilders and powerlifters as well as general athletics.
Okay, we're going to jump again. Let me stay there for a second. Again, I don't know if you can do this. Keep it on the health and fitness world of those guys that are out there and want to bodybuild, want to build the muscle and get strength, but maybe not the level of a power lifter strength, but get strong. Let's keep it focused on that. Is there a recommended dose that you could intelligently say, this is how much cardio you should do?
Well, again, it's measured by VO2 max. And if you're able to obtain an elite level of VO2 max from your existing training, it may be less and less necessary to do any specific. I mean, it's hard to define what cardio is specifically. It's so many different things for so many different people. Anything that elevates your heart rate for an extended period of time can improve your VO2 max.
Let me help you on that, because I think the viewers think it is just a cardio machine or out running or out walking. They don't consider weightlifting technically cardio.
I guess it depends on how you weight lift. Like I said, I've seen your workouts. I think people know that I'm a big fan of the higher volume, higher reps, shorter rest periods. And if I spend 40 minutes straight doing, 20 sets of 20 reps on a 90-second clock, I'm going to get the significant benefit from that. Now, that having been said, there are lower fatigue cardio zones, zone 2, that's alactic, that you can train in for an extended period of time and be able to recover from. The higher fatigue bodybuilding stuff, you probably can't do as much of it as often. But it all goes well together. It just depends on how you design your program. I tend to like to spend more time having bodybuilders lift weights. obviously, because eventually over time, as you go from beginner to intermediate advanced, you're going to need to start to increase your volume. So I'll do splits, I'll do AM, PM workouts. And that's kind of starts getting us into the fat burning conversation for pre-contest. And it just, this whole thing starts to,
it's a tough one. It's a tough one. And the reason why, again, I'm having this recap of previous discussions and kind of simplifying it is just the concept that a basic question like how much cardio should I do from an individual is such a loaded question. Like, I can't answer that. Yeah. I don't know what you look like. I don't know what your age is. I don't know how much you lift. I don't know what your lifestyles. There's so many beyond factors that I'm not going to be the guy that goes on there and says, for me, I'm not going to do, hey guys, everybody, you got to do cardio 4 times a week, 30 minutes to stay healthy. Well, he's 19 years old. He's okay.
No, you need to achieve a certain elite VO2 max as compared to the general population. That could be achieved any number of ways. And it's so arbitrary to say that someone's not in shape if they can't jog a mile. But that might depend on, because that's a specific application of training. And, maybe you can, I would always encourage those folks. They always like, well, come jog with me. Well, come train with me. Let's see if you can do, 4 sets of 20 with 405 on the squat bar.
See, that's a little unfair for you and me to do that to people relative to most pro athletes.
It's the same thing.
I know, but
it's like, unfair for a 155-pound guy who jogs 3 miles a day to claim that is the arbiter of fitness. Again, it's arbitrary.
We're the athletes that could go out for gladiators, and I do 35 pull-ups at 275 pounds.
And that's another huge factor with respect to VO2 max is the more muscle mass you have, the more oxygen you're going to utilize. And it may be harder for you to do certain endurance exercises as a result. That doesn't mean you're out of shape. It just means that you've got more muscle mass utilizing more oxygen.
Well, you're a beast. And so I love the fact that you do your 20s and I don't want to say 20s, your 30 reps of squats and so on and so forth in the battles that we've had to where we push it to another limit. Let's jump forward and talk about the recovery process. And that could be food, that could be supplementation, that could be meditation, that could be anything that you find that the research is supporting to recover better, to move forward.
Well, let's start with, like I said, people tend to spend a lot of time majoring in the minors. Let's start with the stuff that we know works to a substantial degree.
What do you mean by that? Just so they understand this.
Well, I mentioned that in terms of like if you're taking creatine but only sleeping 5 hours, you're an idiot. And I'll just reiterate that there are things that are more important and more effective than others, and that's not to dismiss those other things. But I'll sum it up by saying that first and foremost, you're going to want to get sufficient sleep. You're going to want to have adequate calorie intake. Obviously, the better results in terms of hypertrophy and strength are yielded in a slight calorie surplus over time. And sufficient protein, and the International Society of Sports Nutrition suggests that's about 0.8 grams per pound. And protein frequency from sports nutritionists also suggests that about 4 evenly spaced feedings a day is ideal for performance. And this is, again, we're talking about the 1% in terms of retaining or gaining lean muscle mass. And so those would be your big rocks in terms of recovery. The next piece that I would suggest, far exceeding any manual or passive intervention, would be just general movement. I talked about pulling sleds, riding a recumbent bike, taking 10-minute walks frequently throughout the day. When we compare people who train for an hour against people who train for an hour and also move frequently throughout the day, the group obviously that moves frequently throughout the day has a much superior level of fitness. So I've always said this. You
hurt some feelings there. You did, man.
Hurt some feelings because a lot of people's entire business is passive therapies, and I'm not shitting on those. I'm just saying let's put proper context to them. Let's put them in the hierarchy at their level of importance, and it's certainly below sleep, it's below nutrition, it's below general movement, and we see that in all the literature in terms of passive interventions. And so, my quote is this: I say things that are done to you or for you are rarely as effective as things you do for yourself. And I kind of divide those in between you moving and other people performing manual or passive therapies. And this would be chiropractics, physical therapy, gua sha, electric stem, icing, et cetera, et cetera. Not saying there isn't a place for those, but if those prevent you from doing something that is more effective, there's always a cost benefit to consider. Some of those things feel good. They have actually a greater placebo effect than anything else. Some of those things may be necessary in order to facilitate movement. If you have some pain or suffered a slight injury and you've started to become immobile, you may need an intervention to help give you a pathway to moving that body part through a greater range of motion under some progressive load, initially endurance and then ultimately load. And that's where therapists, I think, are very helpful, so long as we understand they're facilitators of movement. And there's really, I think people think of things as being localized, but what we know now from the biopsychosocial method of pain is that there is a large psychological component, and there's a defense mechanism in place to where you become, as Greg Nuckols says, kinesiophobic when you have pain. And
what does that mean in layman's terms?
It just means that your body's trying to protect itself from injury. There's been a warning sign, and that so you'll kind of restrict movement. And when you restrict movement, I mean, imagine a cast or an ankle brace. Muscles atrophy, range of motion declines.
Let me stop you there for a second. Then would that, I mean, hypothetically, asking for a friend, would that be the guy that's a good height of a human that goes in and always does an age range on a 12-inch box for squats to make sure his knees can open, his hips are rotating and open, and his flexibility into that position is still of youth, to make sure that he's continuously trying to keep the body open and healthy in that position, relative to the guy that goes in on the powerlifting squat and just goes down to a certain level. The man that's going in there trying to keep a great range of motion with pressure. Would that be something that's beneficial for a long period of time, for longevity?
100%. It's kind of a parallel conversation. You'd mentioned about recovery in general, and now you're kind of talking about mobility. Some people look at that as being flexibility, but we see that stretching is no more advantageous than weightlifting under full range of motion, and might actually be disadvantageous. It doesn't seem to prevent injury. It doesn't seem to improve recovery. As compared to any type of movement, dynamic movement through full range of motion. So, and that's just a matter. And again, if you like yoga, do yoga. I'm just saying that if you're doing it in place of full range of motion under load, it's not as effective. And then, I would suggest that you'd be better, you get a better return out of just going through full range of motion under load. We also see people that are hyper flexible. We see this in studies on dancers and gymnasts. If they just stretch but don't load through that full range of motion, they actually expose themselves to a greater degree of potential injury at that full range, because they didn't train themselves to have strength through the range. And so those are some cautionary notes. And again, the best exercise is the one you'll do. And I certainly wouldn't want to, negatively influence somebody from not doing something that is beneficial for their general health. It's just at what point are we measuring and progressing and comparing, exercises against each other, and which one is superior based on, all the things I just discussed. And weight training through full range of motion is superior. So I think you're right.
Time, as you and I both know, wears on the connective, the joints, the ligaments, and age just does that to you. So there's range of motions you can't do. And I always talk about the reason why I'm doing the squat to this level. The reason I'm doing the behind the neck is so I can maintain and at least hold on to that range of motion and not lose it, being this guy that just wants to be a meathead, the young me.
That's a good point. I think I kind of benefited almost unintentionally from the fact that I did both bodybuilding and powerlifting, because bodybuilding does suggest that hypertrophy is optimized from greater range of motion and then a larger variety of different exercises. And so I do see that sometimes powerlifters will start to close in around particular movements and ranges of motion. I think it would bode them well, as I mentioned before, to include an off season. Eddie Cohn competed twice a year, and in between that time, he utilized a whole host of bodybuilding type movements, single leg presses, and behind the neck shoulder presses, and rows to accentuate, obviously to increase his muscle density, but to build up his weaknesses. And I would suggest that to be, part of, I think, any good periodization program for any athlete.
Everything you're stating is studies, and they're supported. And then you're just kind of right now just telling us about these, and you've actually kind of lived those as well, those studies. So this isn't Stan saying his opinion so much cold turkey. This is also how you've lived, but also the studies supporting it. Is that kind of right?
Yeah, and I lean on the experts in the industry. Remember, some years ago, I partnered with Damon McCune, who's a PhD RDN, who was director of dietetics at UNLV and was a professor of exercise physiology. And of course, we have a whole host of fantastic resources now. I mentioned Greg Nuckols earlier. A lot of this is Brad Schoenfeld's research as well. There's the names go on and on in terms of what we're learning about exercise phys and what the studies are showing us. And to their credit, many of them have said the bros were right. People tend to migrate towards what works, using those very simple principles that I mentioned earlier in terms of weakness is never a strength. People who are winning, you want to try and diagnose, why are they winning? Success leaves clues. And I think a lot of us have scanned the continent. I've certainly spent no shortage of time and money training with guys of the like of Eddie Cohn and Flex Wheeler and Mark Bell, and trying to glean everything I could and learn everything I could from them. And now bumping it up against some pretty substantial science that we're fortunate to have access to in this new social media age. And you're right, some people try and establish themselves as being somewhat different and use those arbitrary measures of health, and to say that if you can't do this, you're not healthy, and things like Turkish get-ups, etc. And I'm like, well, you might be able to do Turkish get-up, but can you squat 600 pounds? I'll challenge you to that any day of the week.
Don't challenge Mona. She'll do it.
Yeah, Mona will do it. But I mean, and I don't want to, I don't want to do the same thing in reverse and suggest that you have to squat 600 pounds.
That's why I'm trying to make that clear, that you're giving the studies, which are not arguable. They are what they are. And then you, common sense wise, kind of already was doing that by great coaches in front of you, and also just your own take on it. Did you know all this? And if I'm correct, you're 55 right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So at 55, now that you know all this, are you set up to win as a 20-year-old? Is this how you should approach lifting and food, nutrition, training, recovery?
Yeah. Now, I think a 20-year-old is going to be allowed a little broader range.
Let me not say 20. Let me say 20, 30, and people that want to be elites.
Yeah. I mean, what I've found, because I worked with a lot of collegiate and young professional athletes, is that some of them are successful in spite of themselves, and they're such genetically gifted that yes, they can eat at McDonald's and they can still be pro athletes succeeding at a very high level. Eventually, that might start to catch up with you. And, obviously I try and intervene where I can and provide them guidance to what I think is optimal. But, a lot of those guys, that's why I hate when people point and say, well, Ronnie Coleman did this, or, they'll select a particular athlete. And then my answer is always, well, you're not Ronnie Coleman to begin with. They'll say about Carl Lewis never lifted weights. Would you ever see Carl Lewis's ass and hamstrings? They're huge.
Yeah.
He didn't need to. He already had the force production there. So, I mean, some people just have those gifts, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't lift weights, because you don't have that ass and hamstrings and that force production. So, everybody has their own genetic predisposition, advantages, disadvantages, and I try and focus on weaknesses and then put them in a position to repeat the kinds of behaviors that'll get them to, improve their performance in the shortest time possible.
All right, I'm going to jump back on a timeline here. I know that you met Flex later in life,
Yep.
for you and me, and and the reason why I say this is because I'm going to give a timeline for you meeting these individuals and learning, and the individuals I was around at 9, 10, 11 years old. I was pretty blessed on the people I was around. But again, I was a kid, 9, 10, 11 years old. What am I going to learn? That being said, did you compete only after you met these individuals and got this information, or did you start competing and lifting prior to knowing everything that you knew, even by the time you met Flex? Were you already competing and powerlifting before that?
Oh, you know the answer to that. Yeah, I started
I do, but
competing
I
in
don't think the
19
viewers know.
I started competing in 1988. I was 158 pounds. I was in the novice lightweight class and took 10th place of all things. It's been a long road of self-discovery and learning by trial and error. And I, was fortunate more, to be able to utilize those resources later in my career when I had the time and the resources, the money to do it. But as a young man, I kind of floundered. I took the advice of the guy behind the desk at Gold's Gym who was eating tuna fish and rice cake because he was prepping for a bodybuilding show. And I can certainly tell you now, that's not a great way to add mass. And then I, would flip the script there and started doing the gallon of milk a day and figured out a great way to add a whole bunch of fat. So I learned on both ends of the spectrum. I've gained and lost, albeit intentionally, well over 1,000 pounds throughout my career, bulking up to over 300 pounds to compete in powerlifting and dieting down to single-digit body fat to compete in bodybuilding, doing that back and forth over a 20-plus year career of competing. So yeah, I learned a lot of lessons. I made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I try and utilize those to help others.
Then my question to you then is, do you wish you had all this information
Oh,
and you
yeah.
didn't make the mistakes that you did when you were a kid, and so it would have been more governed?
Agreed. Yeah, I really wish I did. That's why I like when people reach out to me. That's why I wrote the Vertical Diet ebook, because I just put everything in there that I thought all of my clients should know, and it covers a pretty broad spectrum. Obviously from nutrition and training to blood testing to recovery and hormones and a whole host of different things. But I look back now and it's almost laughable how many years I wasted and how many mistakes I made that I could have been a lot better off. We didn't have the internet. You remember, Mike? We didn't have the internet when we were in college. So, we're blessed to now, and of course that brings with it all the TikTok garbage. But there are some fantastic resources that have surfaced to the top. If you follow the right people, the credentialed, competitive, committed individuals out there, and get a good understanding of the science, I don't think there's any reason why people should be making many of the same mistakes that I made.
I get there's so much great science, but I see all these guys that are just going, this is the science base of it. I know this. But a lot of the guys that are saying that, and the incredible information, there's beautiful information. And I want you guys to learn all this stuff. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying back to what Stan talked about is all the information in the world doesn't make you win Miss Universe. Mona doesn't know as much as all these people, but in 3 shows, she won amateur. She went to nationals. She won that universe. Boom, turns pro IFBB. And she's like, what should a diet be? Well, this is what I did. And so there's something lost. And before we get too far away from, that's not science-based. You're doing something wrong here. You're overtraining. I'm glad I did 3-hour workouts with Tom on leg day. I would never have made gladiators the first time, but there was a fight in me. So where's the line? So do you need to know as much as Stan to be a champion powerlifter, or is there something else there? You see where I'm going with this? Because that's where society is now. Society is, I only want the facts. This is what works. This is the workout.
Well, that's kind of neat thing about bodybuilding and powerlifting. Again, it's so self-correcting. I mean, if you go in the gym and start getting weaker, you got to start figuring out why. And overtraining could be a component of that. Then maybe you switch the exercises and do some lower fatigue movements. Maybe you take a day off. But what I found out later in my career is that the more you do, the more you can do. And if you train yourself gradually, progressively over time to be able to handle more volume, you're going to be a bigger, stronger, faster athlete. And so I'm cautious to limit people with the presumption that there's only so much work that they can handle. I just got to be careful about how quickly I get them there, and trying to avoid, obviously, mitigate injury along the way.
Yeah, I was just curious about that because I knew that you'd be somebody that's the outside things we did as kids, the paper route, the silly stuff, played, I think, to me especially, I feel that it played the bigger part, and still today in life, as we accomplish something in the health and fitness world, we're at that peak of the mountain. We get to go travel the world. We get to talk. The world wants to hear us talk about things, which is kind of cool and fun.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because my good friend, business partner, said one time, I was out doing a seminar, and I've got a very successful book and ebook, and one of his employees that had just graduated from their exercise phys studies at the university, had come and attended the seminar and had told him, he was an employee of his, he said, yeah, I think I'm going to write a book. And he kind of chuckled, and he's like, Stan, it took him 25 years to become an overnight success. And I'm grateful for the fact that we have this social media platform, but it was a long, hard road, and we had to accomplish a lot. We had to learn a lot. And, it comes with a great responsibility as well. And that experience in particular, that the information that we provide people doesn't harm them, but it helps them. And it's hard to know that until you've been through it, like you said. And I even said that not only and it doesn't mean you have to be a pro bodybuilder or pro powerlifter to be a great coach. You don't have to be a great football player to be a great football coach either. But you should have had some modicum of success and competed long enough to have learned significant lessons, maybe even been injured and come back to be better than before. I've said, you show me somebody who's never lost or never been injured, I'll show you somebody who's never won anything. And I think it's the adversity that obviously it builds strength, but at the same time, it builds experience and knowledge how to overcome that. And if you're training someone, not just an athlete, but even general population who's coming back from an injury, you have a hard time being empathetic to their experience and being able to guide them through, because it's not just physical, it's psychological. And I think that was one of the great lessons that you learn along the way is how mentally, you only train an hour or two a day, and that's actually the fun part, the easy part. Everything outside of that is what people really need a lot of help with. You have to be able to understand their challenges and help them, guide them through the ups and the downs, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. I've worked with a lot of athletes who have suffered significant injuries or maybe didn't come up in the spot that they had intended. And, you go back to the drawing board and you start over again. And it's a long, arduous process, but it's for those people who have that passion, it just drives them.
And again, I want you guys to understand, we're talking about if you want to be elite. And I think for myself, one of the things that I am grateful for is that I didn't have, I had the greatest around me giving me their insight. And I was so young that I did absorb that on how to train, how to proper squat. And I got it at such a young age, which was great. But they also allowed me to have the leash off and to attack it and to see what I was capable of and going outside the lines.
I think about all the experiences I had, much the same as you. You train with certain people, and we see better than we hear, and I always, sometimes I'll tell people, look, don't do as I say, not as I do. I've had a lot of people tell me a lot of things over the years, but when I watch them, I see that they don't always listen to themselves, and they'll push themselves pretty hard to the point of no return or injury. That would include even with diet. I try and eat as clean as anybody, but when I'm getting ready for powerlifting meet and I have to put on an extra 5 or 6 pounds, and I remember when I was training with Mark Bell in Sacramento, I would go to BJ's in the evening and I would get a top sirloin steak and a baked potato with naked, nothing on it. And I would eat that first, and then I would order a pan pizza for dessert.
I knew something was coming.
And I wouldn't prescribe that diet to anyone necessarily, but at the time I do that 3 nights a week, and the rest of the week I would eat pretty darn clean. You know how I am with my dieting, whole foods, but There are times at which, and I've even gone through, trying to gain weight at times, eating a pint of ice cream every night. It's just things that you throw in there kind of haphazardly in the moment, and how much of it is psychological, who knows? But it wouldn't be necessarily something I'd prescribe to someone. But we see better than we hear. And when I watch, even Flex Wheeler said that to me: "Do as I say, not as I do." And all the way back in 2008 and 2009 when I was training with him, and it becomes hard after a while to separate the two.
There is something I want to get on here and talk to you on, somebody that is similar to, you're much younger than me, but at least you kind of grew up in that era of no social media. So trial and error is a big part of it. Getting started without knowing everything, in my opinion, is a good thing. I'm okay with that. I don't think you need to study and be Stan the first day you walk in the gym. I think that you're going to learn a lot going into the gym. I think the science is great, and I love that you have the science, but I also believe there's a portion of health and fitness, and you and me are still doing this solely because you're my nemesis, and I'm not stopping until you stop, but there is a mentality of outside work that's not perfect, but it shows you how to be mentally strong, and that helps in the gym. Instead of taking everything in the gym, I realized I take the outside and put it in the gym. I don't take the gym and put it in the outside. I thought it was the other way around for so many years because I'm disciplined in the gym, because I do this in the gym. It's because of what goes on outside that I have to trauma myself in the gym and give me a battling workout, push myself, put me in such a crushed physical and mental state so I can take on the outside. And it's an interesting approach. And I know, again, I don't recommend that for everybody, but it helps me be stronger outside and in life. And I don't think you need to be as smart as that. Very few people are, I think, in my opinion, have there's the book smarts, but it's also the experience at the level. I don't mean experience like, hey, I've done a powerlifting meet. No, have you won? Have you injured yourself? Have you come back from something? Have you tried different things to win powerlifting, to win bodybuilding, to be an athlete, and to continue to do it for decades like you have? And so there's a few people I want to go to. And again, I have tons of respect for you, but I was curious about your aspect of social media going to the point of just going, this is the facts, this is the study, go do that. And I don't think it's as simple as that.
I've kind of done it. That's why I memorialized everything into a document, the Vertical Diet ebook I mentioned earlier. And originally when it came out, it was the 1.0 version. And then I evolved that into the 2.0 version as I got feedback and science had evolved. And then the 3.0 version, when I included Dr. Damon McCune, and we wanted to reference hundreds of peer-reviewed published research and videos and articles. And so, yeah, I've already done that. I've started to put everything down and memorialize it and revise it over time so that I have a document that covers just about any question anybody's asked me. You're like me. I get, I've answered over 50,000 DMs in the last probably 2 or 3 years. I get 50, 60 a day. And I try my best to give them a brief answer, maybe copy and paste an article. But I learn from that experience. I learn what kind of questions people are asking, and from my response and their feedback, what works and what doesn't work, depending on the individual. So it's a collaboration of sorts. Every time I work with a great athlete, I feel like I learn as much from them as they do from me. And that same would be true of a coach. I always say that everything works, but nothing works forever. And the things I learn from coaches, I try and put the tools in my toolbox that worked for me, discard the rest, and move on and try and get more information. You never stop learning. I got my CSCS with the NSCA just a few years ago after having gotten my science degree back in the late 80s. You never stop learning, and I've subscribed to all of the people's newsletters and podcasts that the names I mentioned earlier, the academics in the industry, and of course I follow great athletes and try and we've had the benefit of being able to converse with these people over the years, and that's obviously an extraordinary learning opportunity. So You know, all of it is important. You just keep getting better over time if you're persistent and consistent, and you know, continue to push towards your goals.
Do you want to say anything to Stan?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. All right. Your biggest fan is here.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, she texted me nudes earlier, so I'm good.
Why do you have his number?
Well, sometimes I need to revamp my whole situation.
Okay.
So
I got it
anyway,
before you met.
I heard you guys were talking about book smart and
Street smart.
street smart.
Yeah.
I have no idea how all these book smart people have no idea how to go through life. I've seen it all day long in Manhattan, New York. I had my restaurant next to the stock exchange, and I had the smartest, uh, wealthiest guys that you could ever imagine from Wall Street.
How'd
they
you end
would
up with
come
this
in.
dumb broke guy then?
I'm purely jewelry.
Everybody got a
I'm purely
talent.
jewelry.
Everybody
Yeah.
got a talent. I have my own talent, doing with hands. Sorry. But I came off the streets. So pretty much I've only been to school 7 grades. I end up coming to the States, never went to school again because I loved money. I loved making money when I got here. And guess what? I was the editor-in-chief for Muscle and Fitness Hers magazine. I competed to the highest level, which is IFBB. I've learned everything myself as I went through life, off the streets. I've never smoked pot. I've never done drugs. I've never drank alcohol, really. And I grew up in a restaurant business. I had a restaurant for 20 years. I could have been anything in the streets of New York, right? So what it comes down to it's like, the mental approach to anything, either it's weightlifting, nutrition, life, whatever it is. If you're strong enough mentally to go through anything, you will achieve something. And I've seen a lot of weak-minded people, and they're so book smart and they're so wealthy, you can't even imagine. So to me, I'd rather be street smart and do the things that I do every day and deal with this guy than to be
That's
book
tough.
smart. So
That's tough.
you'll never see me sit down and read a book because that's just not me. I don't do it. But I would probably drive around, look at people on the streets, like see what this homeless guy is doing, see what these other people are doing, shopping for food, and just kind of like
Learn by watching.
exactly. So I'm more of a, yeah. So that's me going through life and got myself to where I am today. But then
Right.
is the school helping? Absolutely. But if I have to choose, I would never change anything in my life because I've learned so much from practice. I've learned so much from just doing things myself, doing everything myself, really, because I had nobody to help me. And when it comes down to it, I see Mike trying to sit here and teach all these people, right, on social media, going by the books. This is what you have to do. And sometimes it's frustrating because people don't want to listen and they just think that they know more than obviously. this guy.
Elites continue to learn. Elites continue to learn where the beginner knows everything.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like you have all these experts online and they think they know everything. And to me, I'm
Yeah,
very
we call that the Dunning-Kruger syndrome.
It's
actually.
such. If you guys do not know this study, the Dunning-Kruger, right?
The people who think they know the most actually know the least. And the people who know the most actually think they know the least.
Stan,
Yes, sir.
how you feeling?
I like that smile. Look at that.
Good.
Yeah, handsome.
Why can't you
It's
smile like this?
it's Stan. I don't got that smile. The man's handsome. Any closing remarks for today's discussion, sir? And how social media could be used in a good way?
Yeah, I think once you start to get kind of a list of resources that you focus on, I do have a list of those. The people that I follow and subscribe to, I put them in my vertical diet so that people could actually link to them. And I put their names and links to their articles and videos where I think that the information that is valid. And so I think that's what's important, is just to start surrounding yourself with the kind of people who give good information. And then, just a lot of hard work after that. And eventually, I wanted to play this today. You got to set a goal And my goal is
Oh, I think that's around 92,
my goal is to
93.
be like Mike. But it's important if you have a goal. My goal is to be like Mike. You also have to have a plan. And my plan is more trend.
I love it.
Came prepared.
You see, that's why
Yes, indeed.
Oh, I love it, man. Thank you so much for today, taking the time. That is our time for today. Again, we're going to bring you back. I know that we have really jumped into some studying that you would like to talk about, and I want the world to hear some of the things that we've talked about previously. And we will do that here with this month with Stan Efferding, my nemesis.
He's not only strong, but he's also pretty. So
Yeah,
and smart.
Indeed.
and smart and pretty
It's
and
the
smart.
hair.
Yeah.
It's
And
the hair. It gets them every
I don't
time.
even think if you had hair,
Jason.
I wouldn't like you. I like it just the way you are.
Love you, kid.
All right, brother. Good talking to you guys.
Happy holidays.
Bye now.
All right. So not only Stan's opinion, but also studies supporting what Stan was talking about. And I love that stuff. And it is good information for you guys to understand. But we also gave you the other side. You can go into the gym and you can know just the basics and still accomplish greatness. Again, that's not just in the gym, that's in life. That's getting to the right places. Mona Mearson is a great example of that. Not speaking the language, not the degree, but being a self-made person in America, and also doing so many different facets and still getting to the top level of bodybuilding, and not just getting to the top level of bodybuilding, but the effects of what her mindset was set up for to be in the top level of the health and fitness world in charge of magazines. It wasn't just winning shows. She was the person running the magazines too. So it kind of shows you what you can do on both levels. You can study, you can read all you want, apply it, apply the stuff, and you're going to learn if it works for you or not. But don't be scared not knowing. Get into the gym, get your workouts going. You'll learn as you go. And I think that's biggest thing today is stop waiting, stop doing the 100-hour podcasts and books and self-diet books and training. Get in the gym, get started. You're going to learn a lot of this as you go. So that's my show today. Generation Iron, thank you so much for airing this. And again, remember, guys, I'll be here next Friday.